Next objection. But Leo, how can science work if it isn't true? This is a very common objection, very understandable objection, and this is perhaps the biggest illusion of science, is that it working so well makes everybody give science a pass on its truthfulness, because you just assume that if it works well, it must be true. Well, that's how science fools you. That's how it sneaks under the radar. See? Because as long as something works for you, as long as I can make a gadget using it, then you're going to think that, well, what more is there? I got everything I want out of science. But you see, truth isn't about what you want. Truth is truth. It's independent of whether it works for you, whether it's practical for you. So the reason science can work is, like I said, with some of those other examples, like those, primitive people living in the Amazon, their worldview works for them too. There is an infinite number of worldviews and even an infinite number of sciences that you can invent that will work in different ways. They don't all work the same. They have their pros and cons and trade-offs. Every scientific model in theory has certain pros and cons. It'll work in some areas, it'll have limits and not work in other areas. And then it's a matter for you to determine, what works for you, what kind of work do you need it to do, and so forth. But just because some mental scheme works, like you can come up with a mental scheme to explain something about the functioning of nature, but that mental scheme is not the same thing as nature itself. And there can be many alternative mental schemes to describe or to explain or even to predict the phenomena of nature. So your mental scheme isn't true. It's just loosely corresponding with a few elements of nature. This is what tricks people so much. Remember, we talked about the underdetermination problem in part 1. Well, so the underdetermination problem comes in here, is that, of course, due to the underdetermination problem, we have our models and theories, but all of them are basically underdetermined. That means you can have multiple models and theories for exactly the same set of data points. All right? In fact, you can have an infinite number. It's similar to culture. Culture also creates this sort of illusion. If you grow up in a closed culture, in a closed society, you're going to feel like all of the customs and norms and ways of operating of that culture that you grew up in, your sort of your motherland culture, you're going to feel like that's the only way that reality could work, because it works and it's useful and it's functional, and you're going to hold those as like absolute truths. But then when you travel to some foreign, radically different culture, like you go to Japan or Australia or China or India, Indonesia, into the Amazon, you're going to discover radically different cultures with radically different norms and customs and worldviews, which also work. Some of them work even better than yours did. And some of them work a lot worse than yours. Not all cultures are the same. Again, there's pros and cons to different cultures. But it all depends. It depends on the environment you're talking about, and depends on what you need your culture to do. There's different demands placed upon culture based on the environment and the people and the level of technology and development of the people that the culture is helping to facilitate and all of this, right? But you can clearly see when you travel around the world a lot that there can be hundreds, even thousands of different cultures, and that no one culture is the best. It's all about trade-offs and pros and cons, and sometimes there's multiple ways of doing something. You see, this is obvious with culture. This is less obvious with science. But I assure you it works the same way with science. There is not one science. You can have hundreds, thousands, even more different kinds of models for exactly the same phenomena within science. Sort of imagine if reality is a cake and science is slicing the cake in one particular direction. Other epistemic schemes and worldviews and even other forms of science can slice the cake in different pieces in different directions. So there's not a single way to slice the cake. There's an infinite number of ways of slicing the cake. And how you slice the cake determines on what you need for your survival. Since humans need technology and to manipulate material reality, since it's very useful for humans, we tend to slice the cake in a way that allows us to do that. We will slice the cake in a way that facilitates our manipulation of material reality. And in this way, we fool ourselves into thinking that, first of all, that reality is material. It's not. Secondly, that and secondly, that our way of slicing the cake is the truth and the only way it could be, and that there are no alternatives, and that this is the best alternative. And of course, that's false. The only reason you think that is because you haven't explored other epistemic paradigms beyond science, or other sciences even. You see, there's no such thing as a singular science. Science changes. The science of today is not the science of 500 years ago. It's not the science of 1,000 years ago. All of the models of science have changed, but science was still practical 500 years ago. It was still practical 1,000 years ago. Now, of course, as our models become more sophisticated, we become better at manipulating reality, but that doesn't solve the problem of truth.